Good afternoon, Ms. Chairwoman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Eric Fidelis Alva. I was a Staff Sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. I am honored to testify today and to share my experiences with the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this hearing. I grew up in a military family in Texas. My father served in Vietnam, my grandfather in World War II. I guess you could say that service was in my blood. I inherited my middle name, Fidelis, from my father and grandfather. As you know, the Marine Credo, Semper Fi, is short for Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Loyalty is literally my middle name. So I guess you could say that serving my country was my calling. I joined the military because I wanted to serve. I joined the Marines because I wanted a challenge. I was 19 years old. I was patriotic, idealistic, and also gay.
What you just heard was Staff Sergeant Eric Alva testifying at the Repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell hearing in July 2008. Welcome to OUTview. I'm your moderator, Michael Kieling. This year marks the 16th anniversary of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the controversial Pentagon policy allowing gays to serve in the U.S. military, provided they do not disclose their sexual orientation. The compromise became policy under the Clinton administration and persisted through George W. Bush's tenure in the White House. President Obama has pledged to end Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We will be chatting live with Sergeant Eric Alva in a moment. I am also joined live in the studio with activist and progressive radio host Marc Abrams, who led the successful charge to stop the military recruiting in the Portland public schools. Thank you for joining us, Marc. Marc, as you mentioned in your Don't Ask, Don't Tell article, at your tenure on the Portland School Board, you had entered the recruiting at the schools. Tell me about that.
It was very simple, Mike. I think it was very important to our young gay and lesbian students who were coming out or wrestling with coming out that a school system tells them that they have equal value. It's a very high suicide group. It's a time of immense stress. And some groups approached me when I was running for the board in 1995 and said, will you support a ban on military recruiters? And they were primarily an anti-military group. And while I'm sympathetic with a lot of their political beliefs, I said, I'm not going to do it for that reason. We have to have differing opposing viewpoints in the schools and viewpoints I don't necessarily agree with. The First Amendment's a really important thing. On the other hand, I absolutely agreed that no recruiting should be on the campuses unless they were willing to take every one of our then 57,000 students who qualified to perform the work. And I didn't believe sexual orientation had anything to do with work qualifications. So we had a board vote my second month on the board that I sponsored a resolution, and we banned military recruiters because they were discriminatory employers.
We are now joined over the phone by Staff Sergeant Eric Alva, who, while in command of a Marine supply unit, became the first U.S. military service member injured in the Iraq occupation. Retired Sergeant Alva is currently working with Democratic Representative Martin Meehan of Massachusetts and a bipartisan group of representatives on Capitol Hill to reintroduce the Military Readiness Enhancement Act, legislation that would repeal the Pentagon's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy regarding homosexual conduct. Thank you for joining us, Eric. Please tell me a little bit about your story. I did mention a little something about it. If you wanted to review.
Well, I'm retired 13 years, United States Marine Corps. I got injured the first day of the war on March 21st, 2003. I stepped on a landmine 3 hours into the invasion and subsequently lost my right leg, broke my left leg, and severe damage to my right arm with nerve damage. But it wasn't until 2007 where I went to Congress and actually just pretty much formally came out publicly telling not just the country but the rest of the world that the first American injured in the Iraq War was a gay Marine.
And I bet they were quite shocked by that.
I think as soon as that press conference happened, quite a bit of people from phone calls, emails, all kinds of correspondence started flooding the airwaves of people I knew from people I didn't know to just rash of people wanting to find out if it was true, and then even people who I had known for years who didn't know, just like, how come you didn't tell me? And so, people, and then I think the main question was people wanted to know why I had
publicly come forward to announce that. And I had told people, the reason I had decided to step forward was because for someone who had fought and almost died for his country, protecting the rights and freedoms of the citizens of the country, it wasn't just for some of the citizens, the selected few citizens. Those rights belong to everybody.
Eric, what made you wait 4 years to come out? What had changed by 2007 that made you feel you had to come forward?
Well, it was kind of a mixture of things. I had met my partner right before I was discharged. He was a member of the Human Rights Campaign, and he kind of introduced me into that. And then in 2005, a whole year after we were together, Texas passed the constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage. And I think it was a mixture of things that were happening around the country in different states and constitutional amendments, the Federal Marriage Amendment Act, people talking. And I think it started to just all come into play with me, knowing that I had the notoriety even for meeting the president when he came to my hospital room. And it all started to just, come into play. And then that's when I knew I had to take the step forward is still serving my country, but just in a different capacity because I had the notoriety. But I also had an obligation and responsibility to the people of this country, even in the LGBT community, that if I'm gay, then I must speak up for people's civil rights and their freedoms as what we so practice and preach around the country.
Now, did any of your fellow colleagues, did they know about your orientation?
Quite a bit of them did.
Yeah, there's always an assumption, Eric, that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is there because it reflects the need of the military to have a non-threatening environment for its primarily heterosexual staff. While you were in the military, did you ever feel that was an accurate reflection of what your fellow soldiers, your fellow Marines were feeling, or did you feel that rationale never really was truthful? Every single duty station I went to, I would end up confiding in people I trusted that I knew I could trust. But it didn't change anything. If anything, it brought us closer together. If some were married and they told their wives, then they would actually tell other wives from base housing, and it would end up getting kind of just filtering out, snowballing to the effect where more and more people knew, but nobody cared because I was such a, not to sound narcissistic or anything, I was such a stellar Marine. I did what I was supposed to, and sometimes I was an overachiever, so people knew he's like the poster Marine, who he dates has nothing to do with the job he can teach even some of us. So did you ever experience homophobia within the service or not?
No, not at all. I mean, you have people that make the jokes or little innuendos of playing around saying someone's gay and then, things like that, but no one ever suspected and no one ever really harassed me on that part, where I never even saw any other harassment from other people.
And also, did you happen to see the recent two articles? One was in the New York Times and one was in the Boston Globe regarding about urging President Obama to start the repeal process?
I did. I read about it because I'm very good friends with Dr. Nathaniel Frank and Dr. Aaron Belkin up at the Michael D. Palm Center, and they keep me in the loop on a lot of things that are happening. And so I did see that in him asking for another study and stuff. And realistically, him asking his Joint Chief of Staff and the Pentagon to do another study is going to be it's not just ludicrous, it's absurd because we already seen all the studies that have been done on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So what is another study going to prove that hasn't been proven for the last 15 years?
Speaking of the Palm Center, we have Dr. Nathaniel Frank on the phone. Just released the book Unfriendly Fire this past week. Thank you, Nathaniel, for joining us. You were quoted in a recent Boston Globe article, and you had mentioned something about a delay that could let opposition fester and build.
Right.
Could you explain your theory?
Well, when Clinton first tried to lift the ban on gays in the military in 1992 and 1993, he underestimated the opposition, and one of the mistakes it looks like he made in retrospect was to delay lifting the ban by calling for what he dubbed a 6-month study period, also a cooling off period. And during that period, members of the military, and particularly the religious right, were able to muster their forces and really move opinion polls backwards in terms of public support for lifting the ban. And the result, to make a long story short, was the Don't Ask, Don't Tell compromise, where the ban was not lifted, but instead people were told that they could serve only if they kept their sexuality secret and refrained from any homosexual activity 24/7. And I think that what's happening with Obama is he is wisely being cautious. He's trying to learn lessons from the Clinton fiasco. He also has other priorities on his plate, and that makes sense. And yet, ironically, in trying to avoid Clinton's mistakes, he may end up repeating them because he's dragging his feet now, and he's letting all the chatter begin. And the nation is squarely on the side of equality at this point, far more so than 15 years ago. And yet, if Obama continues to drag his feet, there's definitely a chance, I think a very good chance, that opposition would build, and that he'll have a much harder fight on his hands than if he were to do this swiftly.
Dr. Frank, do you, as you just stated, the nation is firmly on the side of equality. In recent proposals to define marriage as one man, one woman, the percentage opposing those has been climbing and climbing. It only barely passed in California. It didn't pass by that much in Oregon. Do you really think that with the weakened religious right, with a Democratic majority in the Congress, the same history can, in fact, repeat itself?
I think that we will be surprised by the force of the opposition to equal treatment. I tend to be optimistic. I don't think that we'll have the same opposition. I don't think we'll have the same resistance. I think you're correct to view the religious right and the social conservative movement as weakened. And as I've mentioned, the polls on this issue in particular have moved leaps and bounds, really doubling in support from between 40 and 45% in 92 and 93 to 81% in CNN's CNN Gallup poll. That's the most recent poll for repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. All I'm saying is that the fight will be nastier if the White House drags its feet. And this, of course, was an argument that was also made during the Clinton era. There were many people who wanted to see Clinton issue an executive order right away, lifting the ban. And, of course, then he had the authority to do it because this policy was not yet governed by federal statute. The fact that it is now is another one of the consequences of Clinton's delay. So I think the question for Obama is, be cautious, yes, but ask yourself, what are the costs of inaction or delay, as well as what are the costs of action?
One of the other changes from 1993 to now is that we have more research, some of it your own, talking about the idea that gays serving in the military do not, in fact, hurt the performance of the military. Tell us a little bit about that and tell us how that might play a role in the change of this policy.
Right. Well, the Palm Center was founded a few years after this bruising debate over gays in the military for the very reason that there was such a lack of research and evidence and social science data on the question of gay service, and particularly on what happened in both foreign nations and in somewhat analogous U.S. institutions, that is, fire departments, paramilitary organizations, police departments, not perfect analogies to the military by any stretch, but certainly able to give us some insight on what happens during a process of lifting a ban. And what the Palm Center has found again and again, consulting every last expert we could find, and including in certain social science studies that we have published in peer-reviewed journals, including military journals, what we have found is that what happens when countries lift their bans is a resounding nothing. It's a zero. In fact, I joke that it's been hard to get press sometimes for this news because no one wants to write about nothing. But there is, in many cases, and we've studied extensively the case in Britain, Canada, Israel, Australia, as well as others, is that there are doomsday scenarios. And yet when the ban is actually repealed, nothing happens. The adjustment is made quite well. So the Palm Center, as well as Service Members Legal Defense Network, which was also founded shortly after the Don't Ask, Don't Tell battle, are organizations that bring a lot of light to what has been going on and have made very clear that there's a lot of fear in the air, but very little basis for the concerns that the military would lose numbers, or that its morale or recruitment or unit cohesion would suffer. In fact, if I could just add, the latest narrative of social conservatives is to point to a Military Times poll that shows a majority of service members oppose letting gays serve, and that around 10% have claimed that they would leave the military if gays were allowed to serve. Well, we have evidence from what happened in Britain and Canada that very large surveys show us that even larger majorities, larger percentages than the 10%, claimed exactly the same thing. They would refuse to work and live and serve with open gays. And so by that survey, tens of thousands of service members threatened to leave. And yet when the actual bans were lifted, there was maybe one or two.
Do we have any surveys, any studies going back to Harry Truman's order to desegregate the military that would show a parallel statement about leaving that clearly did not come true? Were a lot of white soldiers saying in 1947 that they would leave the military if forced to serve and bunk with blacks?
We have the same indications from that period. I'm not aware of surveys that ask the same question in the same kind of language, so it wouldn't be right to compare it exactly. We do have opinion polls about sentiment, if not the actual question of would you leave, that I know of, and very much the same sentiment, that there were, in many cases, even stronger majorities of white service members who said that this was going to destroy the armed forces. Now, in that case, the adjustment was much harder, frankly, and took really decades until the 70s, and even since then, there continues to be a degree of racial tension in the military, along with tension over women in combat. The military is rightly known as a shining success story for racial integration, but it hasn't been without its bumps, and it took many, many years to occur smoothly. So I say this because those two issues, the question of racial integration and the question of women in combat, is a much graver concern and has caused many more bumps in terms of social disruptions than the question of gays in the military. So while gays in the military registers loudly as a culture war battle, and is something that service members use as an opportunity to express their disapproval of gays in the military, it really doesn't rank up there at the same level as questions and concerns about racial integration and women in combat.
So, Eric, are you involved in the repeal efforts at this point?
I am.
And do you feel are you optimistic? Do you feel that this is going to be the year we repeal it?
I think it's going to take some time. We still don't have any sponsorship in the Senate. I think the economy has taken priority on a lot of issues, and even LGBT issues. So I think we won't see anything happen for the next at least 3 or 4 years. But I'm optimistic that we will get the votes and we will get sponsorship in the Senate. It's just going to take a little work that we've been doing for some time. I mean, we've gone up in our sponsorships in the Senate. In the House, we're almost over 150. That's up from even in 2007 when we only had 110. It takes a lot of lobbying. It takes a lot of efforts. It takes those. I think every constituent or person in each representative's district or senators are doing their work in their home states to talk to the representatives, to co-sign and to have those meetings. I mean, the one thing that we cannot fail to ever do is stop the communicating as far as why we need to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, especially now with signs of Afghanistan, starting to creep up again as the threat of war is moving from Iraq to Afghanistan. And it just doesn't make sense to continually discharge qualified men and women who are able to help in, this war and stuff, especially in Iraq. And I think what people are starting to realize that it just doesn't make sense to have someone discharged for their sexual orientation. When in all reality, we're seeing even the workforce, corporate America starting to change their policies as far as in the workplace to promote non-discrimination against sexual orientation or gender identity. Even military people that say, well, I can't work with someone who's gay, or if they repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, then I'm going to resign or I won't re-enlist. But realistically, if you think about it, if a person who's 22 years old to even 40 years old, and after they retire, the majority of the nation has changed to where people are accepting of diversity. And if you can't work with someone in the military who's gay, then where are you going to work in the workforce? I mean, your supervisor, your manager, your cubicle mate, your colleague is might be gay, might be a transgender. I mean, if you're that close-minded, then you might as well pray for the lottery or something and stay home the rest of your life, because America is changing. I mean, that's the key to our future, is that people are able to be who they are without facing any kind of discrimination.
Eric, given that, and I agree with you, I think society's changing and changing rapidly on that, but given that, why, with 150 House members, is there not a single senator, not a Bernie Sanders of Vermont, not a Russ Feingold of Wisconsin, willing to be the sponsor? There are some pretty progressive folks in the U.S. Senate. Why is it a hard time finding one of them to put their name on the bill?
I think it's hesitation. I think for me, I'm a social worker by trade, by school and stuff. I'm not a political science guru or something, but I think it's worrisome for a senator to put their name on a vote like that because fear of not getting reelected or something. I don't know. I think it's the fear factor. I think it's probably just excuses that, hey, there's other things in the Senate, like we're just witnessing the passaging of the stimulus bill now. There's just, I don't know. I mean, it's very peculiar why someone in the Senate out of 100 and several progressive senators, very liberal, that no one has come forward to even initiate the bill. Until that happens, we won't go anywhere further towards the president's desk. I mean, that's what the path of repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell is going to take. I mean, the president's not going to make an executive order. I mean, even though he possibly could, but we're entrusting our elected officials around the 50 states and to make that decision. And we don't want a repeat of 1993, even though Don't Ask, Don't Tell just passed its 15-year anniversary. But I think by the end of the year, and going back to optimism, I think we will see someone in the Senate come forward and create a bill or file a bill to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Thanks to Eric Alva and Nathaniel Frank for joining us on the program this week, and thank you, Mark, for participating in this discussion. Be sure to check out Nathaniel's book, Unfriendly Fire, available at Amazon and unfriendlyfire.org. This has been OUTview. Thanks for listening. I am Michael Kieling saying so long for now.
'Cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today.